Breaking. The illusion of control just shattered. The Speaker of the House of Commons just did something that constitutional historians will be analyzing for decades. In a single, electrified moment, Sir Lindsay Hoyle didn't just interrupt the Prime Minister, he dismantled his authority in front of the entire world. What you are witnessing is not a debate. It is not a glitch. It is the public disintegration of a government's grip on power. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, stood at the dispatch box expecting to manage the narrative. But instead, he was publicly stripped of his command by the very institution he is supposed to lead. This is a constitutional earthquake. It exposes a terrifying reality deep inside Westminster, a Prime Minister who is reacting, not leading, and a Parliament that has decided it will no longer be silenced. If you want the truth about the power struggle tearing Britain's leadership apart, the truth the mainstream media is too afraid to broadcast, hit subscribe. We are Britain Daily, and we are watching the system crack. To understand the sheer scale of this catastrophe, you have to understand the atmosphere in the room before the cameras even focused on the Prime Minister. The chamber was a pressure cooker. It wasn't the usual rowdy noise of Prime Minister's questions. It was something heavier, something darker. There was a suffocation in the air, a thick, palpable tension that comes when hundreds of elected representatives realize they are being lied to. The issue at hand was not minor. We are talking about Britain's international commitments. We are talking about decisions that involve troops, alliances, and the future of national security. These are the life and death decisions that define a premiership. And yet for days, there had been silence, an absolute, deafening silence from Downing Street. MPs filed onto the green benches with a mixture of confusion and fury. They checked their papers, they checked the order paper, nothing. No statement, no briefing, no respect. The government had made moves on the global stage. Decisions were being whispered about in foreign capitals, yet the British Parliament, the sovereign voice of the people, had been left in the dark. You could see the frustration etched on the faces of the backbenchers, not just the opposition, but even those sitting behind the Prime Minister. They shifted uncomfortably. They whispered behind hands. They knew that walking into that chamber without answers was a political death sentence. But Starmer walked in anyway. He sat down, seemingly oblivious to the storm that was gathering above his head. He looked calm, he looked prepared, but it was a fragile mask, and it was about to be ripped off.
The session began, and immediately the facade crumbled. The opposition didn't wait. They didn't play by the polite rules of engagement. They struck at the jugular. A senior MP rose, not with a question, but with an indictment. The accusation was simple, but it hit the chamber like a sledgehammer. The Prime Minister is bypassing Parliament. He is making decisions behind closed doors and treating the House of Commons like an inconvenience. The shout ran out clear and cold. Why are we learning about this from the newspapers? The question hung in the air, vibrating with anger. It wasn't just a query, it was a challenge to the legitimacy of the government's process. Starmer stood to respond, and this is where the disaster began. A strong leader kills the tension. A strong leader steps up, dominates the dispatch box, and silences the critics with a wave of authority. Starmer did the opposite. He hesitated. He looked down at his binder, flipping a page as if the answer would magically appear in the briefing notes prepared by a panicked aide. When he spoke, his voice lacked the steel required for the moment. He offered vague platitudes. He spoke of due course. He spoke of appropriate timing. He used the hollow, robotic language of a bureaucrat trying to file paperwork, not a leader addressing a constitutional crisis.
The house smelled blood. You could hear the change in the noise. It went from murmurs to a roar. "Answer the question," someone screamed from the opposition benches. "He's scared," shouted another. The wall of noise hit the Prime Minister physically. He flinched. He tried to raise his voice, tried to talk over the heckling, but it was futile. The more he spoke, the less he said. He was trying to suffocate the issue with words, but he was only adding fuel to the fire. He pivoted to NATO. He pivoted to general security themes. He tried to wrap himself in the flag, hoping that the gravity of the subject matter would shield him from the procedural failure. It didn't work. The MPs weren't asking about NATO, they were asking about respect.
They were asking why the executive branch thought it could act like a king, issuing decrees without the consent or scrutiny of the people's representatives. And then the moment arrived, the moment that stopped the clock. Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House, rose from his chair. Usually, the Speaker intervenes to quiet the mob, to protect the Prime Minister from the noise. Not this time. Hoyle didn't look at the opposition. He turned his gaze directly onto the Prime Minister. The room went instantly, terrifyingly quiet. The silence was louder than the shouting had been a second before. Hoyle's voice was low, controlled, and lethal. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He delivered a rebuke that was surgical in its precision and catastrophic in its impact.
"This House," he said, staring down the government front bench, "must always be the first to know." Those words were a declaration of war on the government's secrecy. But he didn't stop there. He twisted the knife. He revealed to the nation, live on camera, that he had personally requested a statement from the government earlier that day. He exposed the fact that the Prime Minister had chosen to ignore the Speaker. Starmer hadn't just forgotten. He had made a calculated decision to sideline Parliament, and now the Speaker was making him pay for it in real time. Hoyle's intervention wasn't a referee blowing a whistle. It was a judge passing a sentence. He was telling the country that the Prime Minister was operating outside the boundaries of acceptable democratic behavior. Starmer froze. For a split second, the cameras caught the look in his eyes. It was pure panic. The script hadn't covered this. The advisors hadn't prepped him for a direct conflict with the chair. He stood there, exposed, while the weight of the Speaker's words sank into the consciousness of every MP in the room. The government front bench looked like statues. They stared straight ahead, terrified to make eye contact with anyone, knowing that their leader was being dressed down like a truant schoolboy. This was authority draining away from the Prime Minister and pouring into the Speaker's chair. It was a visual representation of a government losing control.
But the nightmare wasn't over. Starmer had to speak again. He had to try to salvage the wreckage. He stepped back to the microphone, but he was a diminished figure. He tried to brush off the rebuke, tried to move on to the next question, but the damage was terminal. The opposition sensed the weakness. They launched a second wave of attacks. "If the Speaker says you are wrong," one MP thundered, "then why are you still hiding?" The chamber erupted again. This time the noise was uncontrollable. It was a cacophony of jeers, laughter, and genuine outrage. The Prime Minister's voice was drowned out. He was speaking, moving his mouth, but no one was listening. The authority was gone. The scenes that followed were chaotic. MPs were standing up, waving order papers, pointing fingers. The discipline of the House had collapsed because the respect for the leadership had collapsed. When a Prime Minister loses the ability to command the silence of the room, he loses the ability to govern. We saw Starmer turn to his colleagues, looking for support, but the faces behind him were grim. They weren't cheering him on. They were enduring the spectacle. They knew what this looked like to the voters at home. It looked like weakness. It looked like a government that was terrified of scrutiny because it had something to hide.
This was not a policy debate. Policy debates are boring. This was theater. This was a morality play about power. The core theme emerging from the chaos was betrayal. The betrayal of the ordinary voter who expects their representatives to be informed. The betrayal of the constitutional contract that says the government serves the people, not the other way around. Starmer's refusal to answer, his evasive body language, his reliance on pre-written sound bites, it all painted a picture of a man who believes he is above the rules. And the House of Commons, in a rare moment of unity, rose up to tell him that he is not. Let's go deeper into the mechanics of this humiliation. Watch the hands. Watch the eyes. When Starmer was pressed on the specific details of the international commitments, his hands gripped the dispatch box so hard his knuckles turned white. That is the physical manifestation of stress.
That is the sign of a man who knows he is cornered. When the speaker intervened, Starmer didn't look at him. He looked down. He avoided the gaze of the authority figure. That is a submission response. In the primal language of politics, he surrendered the alpha position to Lindsay Hoyle. Every political analyst watching felt the shift. It was visceral.
And what about the substance? The government's defense was that operational security required silence, but that argument fell apart the moment the speaker spoke. The speaker knows the security protocols. If the speaker says a statement should have been made, then the security excuse is a lie. It was a shield made of paper, and Hoyle poked a finger right through it. The government wasn't protecting national security. They were protecting their own political comfort. They didn't want to answer difficult questions about unpopular decisions. They wanted to present the country with a fait accompli. They wanted to rule by decree. And they got caught. The fallout from this 10-minute segment is going to be radioactive. Already, the clips are circulating on social media. They aren't showing the long, boring speeches. They are showing the rebuke. They are showing the silence. They are showing the Prime Minister's frozen expression. The narrative is setting like concrete. Starmer is weak. Starmer is secretive. Starmer is losing control. Once that narrative takes hold, it is almost impossible to shake. It infects every future interaction. Next time he stands up to speak, people won't listen to his words. They will be watching for the hesitation. They will be waiting for the next rebuke. He has become a damaged vessel. Inside the corridors of Westminster, the whispers have already started. The sharks are circling. Labour MPs are checking their majorities, wondering if their leader is becoming a liability. They saw what happened. They felt the humiliation in their own gut. To sit there and watch your leader get schooled on the basics of parliamentary democracy is deeply demoralizing for a party. It creates doubt, and doubt is the cancer that kills governments. If he can't handle Lindsay Hoyle, how can he handle Putin? How can he handle the unions? How can he handle the economy? The competence question has been raised, and it wasn't raised by the opposition. It was raised by the speaker. The media reaction is already shifting. The sympathetic voices are struggling to find a spin. You can see the pundits on the news channels trying to downplay it, calling it a procedural row. But they know they are lying. They know this was a spectacle of incompetence. The headlines are writing themselves. Speaker slams PM. Commons chaos. Starmer silenced. This is the kind of press that cuts through the noise and reaches the average voter. It reinforces the feeling that the people in charge don't know what they are doing. It feeds the growing cynicism that the system is broken. But there is a darker implication here. This wasn't just about one day. This is a pattern. We are seeing a government that increasingly views scrutiny as an attack. They view questions as insults. They view transparency as a weakness. This bunker mentality is dangerous. It leads to bad decision-making. It leads to hubris. When you stop listening to Parliament, you stop listening to the country. You start to believe your own propaganda, and that is when mistakes happen. Catastrophic mistakes. The speaker's intervention was a warning flare sent up from the deck of a sinking ship. He was trying to tell the captain that he is heading for the rocks. But is the captain listening? The tragedy of this session is that the actual issue, the international commitments, the troops, the alliances, was completely lost in the chaos. The public still doesn't have the answers. We still don't know what deals have been cut in our name. The government successfully avoided the questions, but at what cost? They burned their political capital to buy a few more days of secrecy. It's a bad trade. The questions haven't gone away. They will come back, louder and harder next time. And next time, the Prime Minister will have even less authority to deflect them. He has used up his goodwill. He has used up the benefit of the doubt. As the MPs filed out of the chamber, the atmosphere was different than when they walked in. The air had changed. The invincibility of the large majority had evaporated. A majority means nothing if you can't control the floor. A majority means nothing if the speaker is openly correcting you. The opposition walked out with a bounce in their step. They know they drew blood. They know they have found the weak spot. They will hammer this point home for months. The Prime Minister who hides. The Prime Minister who runs. It's a simple, devastating attack line. And what about us?
What about the people watching this unfold? We are left with a profound sense of unease. We are watching a system that is straining under the weight of its own dysfunction. We are watching leaders who seem smaller than the moment demands. The sight of a prime minister being publicly humiliated is not a victory for anyone. It is a sign of a deep rot in the state. It suggests that the mechanisms of accountability have to be forced, screaming, and kicking into existence. It shouldn't take a constitutional crisis to get a straight answer. It shouldn't take the speaker shouting down the government to get a statement on war and peace.
This is the reality of British politics right now. It is brittle, it is volatile, and it is being led by people who are terrified of the light. But breakdown we witness today is a symptom of a much larger disease. It is a disease of arrogance. The belief that once you win an election, you stop answering to the people. Lindsay Hoyle reminded the world today that this is false. He reminded Starmer that he is a servant, not a master. But the lesson came at a terrible price. It cost the dignity of the office. It turned the House of Commons into a gladiator pit where the emperor was shown to have no clothes. We are entering a dangerous phase. A wounded prime minister is an unpredictable prime minister. Starmer will try to regain control. He will try to overcompensate. He might lash out. He might clamp down harder on information. Or he might make rash decisions to prove his strength. The weakness exposed today makes the future more unstable. The sharks in his own party will be watching. The opposition will be hunting. And the speaker will be waiting. The line has been drawn in the sand. If the government crosses it again, the next rebuke will be even harder. The next humiliation will be even more total. So look closely at the footage. Don't let them spin this as business as usual. Look at the faces. Look at the fear. Look at the collapse of command. This is what it looks like when power evaporates. This is what it looks like when the system fights back. The government thought they could silence Parliament. They thought they could ignore the rules. They were wrong. And now everyone knows it. The only question left is, how long can a leader survive when the very institution he stands in refuses to respect him? The clock is ticking, the trust is gone, and the crisis is just beginning.
This wasn't just a bad day at the office. This was a revelation. It stripped away the polish and the PR and showed us the raw, ugly truth of a leadership in freefall. The speaker stood for democracy today. He stood for the right to know. But in doing so, he exposed just how fragile that right has become. We are walking a razor's edge. The institutions are clashing. The norms are breaking. And in the middle of it all stands a prime minister who looked for 10 agonizing minutes like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. History is written in moments like this. Not in the long, prepared speeches, but in the unscripted disasters, in the flashes of panic, in the roar of the crowd. Today, history was written in the House of Commons, and it was a tragedy for the government. The power has shifted, the game has changed, and the Prime Minister is no longer the one holding the cards. Parliament has woken up, and it is angry. Stay tuned. Stay vigilant, because if they can hide this from you, imagine what else they are keeping in the dark. This story isn't over. It's just getting started. And we will be here, watching every move, decoding every silence, and bringing you the truth that they are desperate to conceal. This is the state of our democracy, fragile, fractured, and fighting for its life. Don't look away.